Every person who grew up obsessed with survival horror has a room they can never truly leave. For me, it's a dark living room back in 1996. I'm 6 years old, sitting cross-legged on the carpet. The harsh flicker and glow of a bulky CRT television fills the room. The controller cable is pulled completely tight because I'm leaning in as close as I possibly can, trying to see through the shadows of a digital mansion. I remember the sounds of the plastic buttons clicking beneath my thumbs, the cold sweat on my palms, and the genuine paralysing dread that hit my chest every time I walked to a closed door. Opening a new room meant watching a slow creaking wooden door animation play out in complete silence, while desperately hoping that whatever was waiting on the other side didn't have teeth. For the first few years of its life, Resident Evil understood that kind of fear perfectly. It built an empire by making you feel small, trapped, and completely vulnerable. But as the years passed and the console generations moved on, the series slowly drifted away from that feeling. It grew bigger, louder, and more desperate for mainstream Hollywood appeal. By the mid-2010s, that quiet, suffocating tension had almost disappeared. In its place was a bloated action spectacle where elite soldiers punched volcanic boulders and backflipped away from Michael Bay-style helicopters. The soul of the franchise hadn't just faded, it felt buried beneath a mountain of action movie cliches, which is exactly why booting up Resident Evil 7 for the first time felt like such a shock. Stepping into this game, especially if you're brave enough to put on the VR headset, didn't just feel like a leap forward for modern hardware, it felt like stepping into a terrifying time machine. It skipped over 2 decades of corporate bloat and dropped you right back onto that childhood carpet, staring at the screen with wide eyes and a racing heart. Suddenly, walking towards a simple wooden door at the end of a dark hallway carried that same old school weight. You could almost feel the dread coming from the other side, making you stop with your thumb hovering over the analog stick because you genuinely didn't know if you wanted to see what was waiting beyond the door. It was a complete and unapologetic return to pure survival horror, and after years of losing its identity in the dark, the franchise had finally found its way home.
She's back.
Go tell Aunt Rhodey. Go tell Aunt Rhodey. Go tell Aunt Rhodey that everybody's dead.
Welcome to my Resident Evil retrospective series. Today we're diving into Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. To understand this game, you almost have to imagine the smell, the damp heavy scent of the stagnant Louisiana swamp water, rotten wood and something metallic slowly decaying behind the walls. For almost a decade, this franchise had been running away from the dark, trading its suffocating atmosphere for Hollywood explosions and globe-spanning military action. But the moment you arrive at the Baker estate, everything changes. The frantic pace of the modern era comes to a complete stop, the air feels still, the shadows grow longer, and the game reminds you that real terror doesn't come from a world-ending bioweapon. It comes from a locked door, a pitch-black hallway, and the slow heavy footsteps of someone hunting you from the floor above. Coming straight from the smoking wreckage of Umbrella Corps into the opening hours of Resident Evil 7 is one of the most refreshing experiences in modern gaming. For years, watching this franchise felt like seeing a brilliant artist give up their passion to paint generic corporate signs for a paycheck, but the moment you arrive at the Baker estate, you can feel something different. The creativity is back, the vision is back, and so is the willingness to take genuine artistic risks. It honestly reminds you why Capcom became one of the biggest names in survival horror. It's a feeling I struggle to find in many of the games that followed. Don't get me wrong, I completely understand Capcom's current strategy of regular releases. The steady stream of remakes and sequels has been hugely successful, and for good reason. They're polished, fun to play, and they know exactly what players expect. But many of those later games rely on familiar assets, familiar mechanics and proven ideas. They give you exactly what they already know works. Resident Evil 7 did the opposite. It wasn't trying to play it safe, it wanted to make your skin crawl. Even today, it stands out as a genuine labour of love. To me, it's the most passionate and single-minded Resident Evil project since the revolutionary Resident Evil 4. It has aged beautifully because it wasn't designed by a committee chasing quarterly targets. It was built by a team of horror fans determined to remind the entire industry who still wore the crown of survival horror. If you look back at the horror landscape in the mid-2010s, it was the perfect moment for something bold to happen. We were all riding the excitement of the PlayStation 4's early years when out of nowhere, Hideo Kojima released PT onto the PlayStation Store. If you were lucky enough to play that demo while it was still available, you'll know exactly why people still talk about it today. It was not more than a loop through a single decaying hallway, but somehow it felt endless, and despite its simplicity, it created more tension than most full-priced horror games ever released that year. When the internet pieced everything together, it wasn't just a strange horror demo, it was a teaser for a brand new Silent Hill directed by Kojima and starring Norman Reedus. The excitement was enormous, then everything fell apart. The project was cancelled, the demo disappeared from the store, and the entire industry seemed to lose something special. But PT changed what people expected from modern horror. It showed us what the genre could become. We wanted that level of intimacy, that suffocating claustrophobia, and that genuine bone-deep fear. Capcom was clearly paying attention. At E3 2015, the company unveiled a PlayStation VR demo called Kitchen. Looking back, it was one of the smartest pieces of misdirection in the company's history. There was no Resident Evil branding, no mention of Raccoon City, no T-Virus and no familiar faces. Most of the game and press assumed it was simply a gritty VR horror demo for a small studio. You were tied to a chair while a grisly scene unfolded right in front of you. It was disturbing, uncomfortable and unforgettable. Only later did Capcom unveil the truth. Kitchen wasn't just a standalone experiment, it was the early foundation of Resident Evil 7. The studio was testing the waters. They wanted to know if their new engine could deliver that level of realism, and whether players would embrace a first-person Resident Evil before committing to the idea. It was a brilliant strategy. Instead of relying on the name, they let the horror speak for itself, and by the time they finally revealed what it really was, the trap had already been set.
Your hand. Ow! Keep still. Damn it.
The trap was finally sprung during Sony's E3 2016 press conference, and the reveal was brilliant. The trailer opened with a grainy lo-fi first-person nightmare. You wandered through a run-down, sun-bleached house filled with rubbish, rotten meat and an eerie, oppressive silence. For almost the entire trailer, nobody knew what they were watching. The audience inside the theatre and millions more watching at home assumed it was a brand new horror game. Maybe an indie project, maybe a psychological thriller, maybe an entirely new IP. Then the screen faded to black, the title slowly appeared, Resident Evil. And with one clever piece of graphic design, the letters V, I and I glow bright orange inside the word evil. The room exploded. It remains one of the biggest audience reactions in E3 history because almost nobody saw it coming, but Capcom wasn't finished. The moment the conference ended, they released a playable teaser on the PlayStation Store called Beginning Hour. Much like PT, this wasn't a traditional demo. You didn't play as Ethan Winters, there was almost no combat, no arsenal of weapons, and no familiar herbs to keep you alive. Instead, it was a self-contained prologue designed to establish the game's new direction while testing the curiosity of its players. The internet completely lost its mind. Beginning Hour turned the entire gaming community into one giant team of amateur detectives. The house was packed with cryptic puzzles, hidden clues and mysterious objectives that seemed to serve no purpose. The biggest mystery of all was its infamous dummy finger, a simple plastic finger that sat in your inventory with absolutely no obvious use. Players spent thousands of hours searching for answers. They rubbed it against damp walls, hunted for hidden axes, data mined the game's files, and chased countless theories, all trying to discover what this one useless looking item actually did. It was a level of community obsession we hadn't seen in years, and it proved that players were desperate for the return of classic survival horror where mystery was just as important as the combat. Capcom kept the excitement alive throughout the rest of the year. The Twilight update arrived in September, the Midnight update followed in December. Each one unlocked new areas, introduced new endings, and gave us our first terrifying glimpses of the Baker family. After years of increasingly action-focused Resident Evil games, this single demo convinced even the most skeptical fans that this series was finally returning to its survival horror roots.
This is bad. Real bad. Andre's dead. He's bleeding from his fucking eyes, leaking blood all over. And Clancy, I don't even know where the fuck he went. The Baker family, batshit fucking crazy. Ah! This tape, you gotta get it to Polygon. You hear me? Get it to Polygon. Whatever. Ah! What the fuck? I can't take this anymore. These people, these freaks. You gotta get the tape. You gotta get here. You gotta. Ah!
To understand why Resident Evil 7 worked, you first have to look at the wreckage left behind by Resident Evil 6. That game tried to be everything at once: a co-op shooter, a martial arts brawler, a globe-trotting action movie packed with explosions. By the end of it all, the series felt exhausted, and so did the fans. Capcom realised that saving Resident Evil didn't mean making it bigger, it meant tearing it back down to its foundations. The rocket launchers had to go, the military squads had to go, the world-ending stakes had to go. Instead, the game locked you inside a house with nothing but your own racing heartbeat. The move to a first-person perspective wasn't about chasing horror trends like Outlast, it was about taking away the player's sense of safety. The moment the camera moves into Ethan's eyes, the world closes in around you. The damp, decaying wood of the Baker house isn't just scenery anymore, it's right in your face. Every narrow hallway feels claustrophobic, every corner becomes a blind leap of faith, and beneath that modern first-person presentation lies the heart of classic Resident Evil. Once the opening sequence is over, the game reveals itself as a direct descendant of the 1996 original. You're dropped into an interconnected house full of locked doors that can only be opened with specific keys and emblems. Your inventory is small, forcing you to make difficult choices every time you pick something up. Do you carry a few extra shotgun shells, or do you keep space for a single green herb? Even the iconic safe rooms return. For a few precious moments, a familiar melody replaces the silence, your heartbeat slows, you catch your breath, and then you step back into the darkness.
Wait! Wait!
I can hear her. I can feel her clawing her way back inside of me. Get out! Leave me alone! I've been bad. I deserve this.
When you look back at the history of Resident Evil, its biggest influences have always come from Hollywood. The original games took inspiration from George Romero's zombie films. Later entries leaned heavily into big-budget action movies, but when Capcom began work on Resident Evil 7, they threw that entire formula away. Instead of following modern blockbusters, they mixed together decades of the darkest, grittiest and most unsettling horror films they could find. The result feels completely unique. The biggest influence is Tobe Hooper's 1974 classic, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Its DNA runs through almost every corner of the Baker estate. You can feel it in the isolated countryside, the decaying house, and the sense that you're completely cut off from the outside world. Nowhere is that influence clearer than during the unforgettable dinner scene. You're tied to a chair, forced to watch a family that somehow feels both terrifying and strangely ordinary as they scream across the dinner table over a meal you really don't want to identify. It's a direct tribute to the Sawyer family. Even Jack Baker's relentless pursuit feels like a modern evolution of Leatherface, a terrifying father figure who turns an ordinary home into a slaughterhouse. Alongside that influence, Capcom borrows heavily from Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead. As the game unfolds, it leans further into body horror, decaying buildings, and the thick black mold spreading through every room. Possession and infection become central themes, twisting ordinary people into violent, laughing monsters that simply refuse to stay dead. And of course, no Evil Dead inspiration would feel complete without a chainsaw. The brutal garage fight with Jack Baker feels like pure groundhouse horror. It's violent, grotesque, and surprisingly funny in all the wrong ways. That strange mix of horror and dark comedy makes the entire encounter even more memorable.
Oh, shit! Nice car, Ethan. Fuck! Let's finish this, you and I. Oh, yeah! I'm gonna take you for a ride. No!
The opening hours also borrow heavily from the Blair Witch Project and the found footage horror boom of the late 1990s and 2000s. Walking through the quiet woods before entering the abandoned guest house creates a slow, uneasy sense of dread. Then there's the VHS tape mechanic. It's one of the smartest ideas in the entire game. Instead of simply watching found footage, you're forced to play through it yourself. You aren't just observing a terrifying recording, you're living it, and that creates a deep sense of vulnerability long before the first true monster ever appears.
Believe me? This toy? Well, you can't fake this. It has taken me weeks to finish this, and it is finally ready. And it's all for you. Oh, come on now. Don't be like that. It's gonna be fun.
While Resident Evil 7 wears the look of an American slasher film, its psychological horror comes from somewhere very different. Capcom blends the blood-soaked energy of Western horror with the slow lingering dread of Japanese classics like Ringu and Ju-on the Grudge. This isn't horror built around jump scares or roaring chainsaws, it's the quiet feeling that something is wrong, that something is waiting just beyond your line of sight. No character represents that blend better than Evelyn. The image of a pale little girl with long dark hair standing silently at the end of a hallway is instantly recognisable to fans of Japanese horror. She doesn't charge at you with a weapon, she barely moves at all, she simply appears, standing motionless at the end of a corridor, or laughing softly from somewhere you can't quite see. That makes her the perfect contrast to Jack Baker. Jack creates panic through constant pursuit, Evelyn creates fear through uncertainty. Jack is a physical threat, Evelyn is psychological. Together, they give the Baker estate two completely different kinds of horror. Capcom then blends that Japanese influence with ideas taken from modern horror thrillers, especially the Saw films. The result reshapes the middle of the game. What begins as a desperate escape slowly becomes a cruel series of traps, puzzles, and impossible choices. You're no longer just trying to survive monsters, you're trapped inside a house designed to exploit your fear. Every room feels deliberate, every challenge feels personal. It's a clever mix of Japanese psychological horror and the calculated cruelty of modern Western thrillers.
Fix your leg. You can do it.
What the fuck?
He's daddy.
One of Resident Evil 7's greatest achievements is the way it treats its setting. The Baker estate isn't just a location, it becomes a character of its own. By this point, the series had started to suffer from globe-trotting fatigue. Previous games constantly pushed you from one huge action set piece to the next. One moment you were fighting through an Eastern European city, the next you were racing through a high-tech skyscraper in China. Those places stopped feeling like real locations, they became little more than backdrops for the next explosion. Resident Evil 7 brings everything to a stop. It locks the doors, plants its feet firmly in the Louisiana mud, and turns the Baker estate into one of the most memorable locations in the entire franchise. Instead of constantly expanding outward, the game folds back in on itself. You're asked to learn one house instead of an entire world. You begin in the filthy claustrophobic halls of the main house, and then you move into the flooded ruins of the old house. Eventually, you're forced through Luca's cruel industrial playground. Because you spend so much time revisiting these areas, the house slowly becomes familiar. You remember which floorboards creak, which shortcuts avoid danger, and which crawl spaces offer a brief moment of relief. That focus allows Capcom to deliver some of the finest environmental storytelling in survival horror. The story isn't told through endless cutscenes, it's woven into the house itself. You discover what happened to the Baker family simply by paying attention. Old family photographs covered in grime, newspaper left on coffee tables, ordinary belongings scattered through a child's bedroom. Every object quietly tells part of the story. What makes it all so unsettling is how familiar everything feels. A kitchen, a garage, a dining room, they're ordinary places, but Capcom twists them into spaces filled with dread. Decay clings to every surface, black mold creeps across the walls, even standing still feels dangerous. The sound design does the rest. Heavy footsteps above your head, a distant door slamming somewhere in the house, silence that stretches just a little too long. It's a reminder that anticipation is often more frightening than action itself.
I told you to stay out of here!
The creative momentum behind Resident Evil 7 didn't end when the main campaign was over. Looking back at its post-launch support, Capcom delivered one of the most ambitious and genuinely interesting DLC lineups the series has ever seen. Instead of recycling campaign areas or filling the season pass with a handful of recycled challenge maps, the developers turned the expansions into a creative playground. Each one explored a different style of horror. Together they felt like a horror anthology, with every episode offering its own unique kind of fear. That experimental spirit is at its best in Banned Footage Volumes 1 and 2. Those stories take us back in time through the eyes of the doomed cameraman Clancy Jarvis. One of the standout chapters is Bedroom. Here, the game shifts into a slow, claustrophobic escape room experience, clearly inspired by films like Misery.
This isn't fair! He didn't get out of the cock-a-doodle car!
You're trapped in a bed, searching for clues while Marguerite Baker leaves the room.
That smells good, don't it? take those things off and you can go out and play. But you gotta eat all of it.
I'm not eating that. It smells like shit.
I worked all day on that, you ungrateful prick! I made it with love! You better behave yourself now!
But every second counts. If she hears a noise or suspects something is wrong, she storms back inside. You have to scramble back into bed, position the restraints exactly as they were, and return every object to its original place before she notices anything has changed. Fail, and the punishment is brutal. It's an incredibly intense puzzle that depends almost entirely on observation, patience, and keeping your nerve. Combat disappears completely, in its place is pure domestic anxiety, and it proves just how flexible the Resident Evil engine could be when Capcom was willing to experiment.
What the? Where am I?
Hey, look at me. Yeah, look at me. There you go. Now, I wonder, do you have what it takes? So you two are gonna play a little game. And whoever wins gets to walk on out of here alive.
If Bedroom showed that Capcom could master slow burning psychological horror, the rest of the anthology is where developers really started experimenting. This is where they took some genuinely bold risks. The best example is 21. On paper, it sounds completely ridiculous. It's a high-stakes game of blackjack hosted by the twisted Lucas Baker. You're trapped to a chair opposite another terrified captive. Every hand you lose is punished with brutal mechanical torture. The dim lighting, the constant hum of machinery, and Lucas's cold clinical cruelty transforms a simple card game into one of the most unsettling experiences in the DLC. But if we're talking about emotional storytelling, Daughters is the standout chapter. This prequel takes place on the very night a wrecked tanker drifts onto the Baker estate. For the first time, we see the family before everything falls apart. They're ordinary, kind-hearted people who open their home to help a frightened little girl named Evelyn. Watching that family slowly fall apart from the inside completely changes how you see them. They stop being slasher villains and become victims of a biological nightmare. Capcom saved one final surprise for the end of the roadmap. End of Zoe pushes the series in a completely different location. It introduces Joe Baker, a tough survivalist living deep in the Louisiana bayou. Unlike Ethan, Joe doesn't rely on stealth or stockpiles of ammunition. He solves his problems with his fists, quite literally. He punches biological weapons to death. It's ridiculous, it's over the top, and it somehow works. Beneath all the madness is a surprisingly heartfelt ending that brings the Baker family's story to a satisfying close.
I'm Redfield. I'm glad we found you.
The fuck took you guys so long?
While the main game brings Ethan's nightmare to a satisfying close, the free Not a Hero DLC changes the picture completely. For most of the campaign, it feels like you're trapped in an isolated family tragedy deep in the Louisiana backwoods. Then everything changes, an Umbrella helicopter appears, a familiar voice steps out, and he introduces himself as Chris Redfield. It's a brilliant twist, although they got the character model completely wrong. That's not Chris. In an instant, the intimate horror story collides with a wider world of Resident Evil. What makes Not a Hero so interesting isn't just the change of gameplay, it's what it says about the series itself. Chris isn't working for the BSAA, instead he's operating alongside a rebranded Blue Umbrella. It's a decision that immediately raises questions and adds another layer of uncertainty to the story. The gameplay reflects that change perfectly. You're no longer Ethan Winters struggling to survive whatever you can find, you're controlling one of the series' most experienced soldiers. You have a heads-up display built into your helmet, an advanced filtration system that protects you from toxic spores, and enough combat training to punch a molded clean through the head. The horror doesn't disappear, it simply changes shape. Instead of feeling helpless, you're under constant pressure to complete a dangerous mission before everything falls apart. It also serves as the perfect palate cleanser. After hours of careful exploration and survival, Nora Hero finally lets you cut loose with military equipment deep beneath the Baker estate. That release feels earned. It doesn't undermine the horror of the main campaign. Instead, it bridges the gap between classic action-focused Resident Evil with this new first-person direction. It proves the RE engine could support both styles without losing the dark, oppressive atmosphere that made Resident Evil 7 so memorable.
Game over.
However, a truly honest retrospective also means talking about the game's flaws, and Resident Evil 7 is far from perfect. For all its incredible atmosphere and historical importance, it has a few structural problems that become much more obvious on repeat playthroughs. The biggest issue is the lack of enemy variety. Outside the excellent boss fights against the Baker family, almost every regular encounter comes down to fighting the Molded. There are little more than shambling creatures covered in black mould, and there are really only 3 main versions: the standard Molded, the faster blade arm variant, and the larger one that spits acid. By the time you've fought your 15th Molded, the fear they created during the opening hours has almost completely disappeared. They stop feeling like an unpredictable biological nightmare. Instead, they become routine, just another obstacle to clear before you can get back to exploring. That problem becomes even more noticeable during the final third of the game. The moment you leave the Baker estate and move on to the wrecked tanker of the salt mines, the pacing begins to lose momentum. The detailed interconnected design of the house gives way to long grey corridors and far more linear levels. The careful exploration, environmental storytelling and resource management that define the first half gradually fade into the background. In their place is a much more conventional shooter. It feels as though Capcom began to run out of ideas just before the finish line. After spending hours returning Resident Evil to its survival horror roots, the game slips back into some of the action-focused habits it had worked so hard to leave behind.
Ethan? Hey, shh. I know. I'm not gonna hurt you. Hell, I never would have if I could have helped it.
What do you mean?
I'm no killer, son. Neither is Marguerite, nor my boy Lucas, or even Zoe here. That girl Evelyn, she did this.
Those late game flaws quickly fade into the background when you step back and look at what Resident Evil 7 achieved. This wasn't just a creative reset, it was the birth of the RE engine. That new technology transformed Capcom's entire development pipeline. It was fast, flexible and visually impressive, and it became the foundation for everything that followed, from the acclaimed Resident Evil remakes to Devil May Cry 5 and Resident Evil Village. By taking a genuine risk on first-person horror, grounded storytelling, and a return to classic survival horror, Capcom didn't just rescue one of its biggest franchises, it helped restore confidence in big-budget horror games. The studio proved that modern audiences didn't need constant explosions, globe-spanning military conflicts, or relentless spectacle to stay engaged. Sometimes all you need is a dark room, a locked door, and the courage to find out what's waiting on the other side. The modern era of Resident Evil began right here. It was a complete reinvention, a desperate but brilliantly executed gamble that proved survival horror could still terrify a modern audience. But as remarkable as this journey through the Baker estate was, it also laid the foundation for something even bigger. Because once Capcom remembered how to make us afraid of the dark, they turned their attention to the past. They took everything they learned here and used it to bring one of gaming's greatest survival horror classics back to life. Next time, we're leaving the Bayou behind and heading straight into the rain-soaked streets of Raccoon City as we take a look at the remake of my favourite game in the entire franchise, Resident Evil 2. It's going to be a big one, so if you'd like to follow this retrospective journey, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts down in the comments. And finally, a huge thank you to all the channel members. Your support makes these deep dives possible and I genuinely couldn't do them without you. Until next time, I'll see you on the next entry.
Welcome to the family, son.
You in order, rookie. You save yourself first.
Help me, please!
What in God's name?